They examined her ID carefully, questioned whether she was legitimate, and even called security, all before realizing they were on the verge of refusing service to the very woman who had the power to end their careers instantly. The thought had been lingering quietly in the back of her mind for months, faint at first, easy to ignore. But the more Danielle Grayson considered it, the more it consumed her. She had built Grayson Trust from nothing, her institution, her pride, her legacy. She wasn't just a CEO tucked away in some high-rise office. She had poured years into making her bank a symbol of fairness and accessibility. But was it truly that? That question had been haunting her. She'd heard rumors, subtle murmurs about how certain clients were handled at specific branches. Nothing overt, no scandals. Just unsettling anecdotes from trusted friends and passing remarks that raised concerns. Initially, she dismissed them. After all, her bank had strict protocols on equal treatment, zero tolerance for discrimination, and high standards of customer care. But words on paper didn't guarantee results. Danielle needed more than policies. She needed evidence, not as the one in charge, but as an ordinary customer. So today that's what she became. No power suit, no luxury accessories, just a cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. She parked outside a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, Indiana, one she had personally approved just 3 years ago. She had cut the ribbon, posed for photos, and spoken about trust being the heart of banking. Now she entered as a stranger. The glass doors slid open, and the smell of fresh paper mixed with a strong industrial air freshener filled the air. A slow afternoon, a few people in line, others seated, and a teller wrapping up some cash balancing. Danielle adjusted her bag and approached the counter. The teller, a young woman in her 20s with a pale face and tightly pulled back hair, barely acknowledged her. No smile, no greeting, just a glance and a return to her screen. Danielle cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't meet her eyes, just handed over a clipboard. "Fill this out." Basic form, name, account, amount. Nothing out of the ordinary. Danielle scribbled in $5,000. Not an extreme amount, but enough to trigger ID confirmation. She passed the clipboard back. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The teller's eyes scanned the form, then flicked to the ID. Her brow furrowed. Lips tightened. The hesitation was subtle but unmistakable. Danielle felt the change instantly. The teller looked up again, this time really seeing her, and paused longer than necessary. In that moment, Danielle understood. This wasn't about the withdrawal. It wasn't about policy. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's hand hovered over the keyboard, then she seemed to decide something. She slowly placed the ID down. I'll be right back." Danielle's eyes narrowed as the teller left, disappearing through a back door. She tapped her nails against the counter. This was more than she expected, but she wasn't backing down. Not until she got clarity. She leaned against the counter, watching the frosted glass door close behind the teller. The energy in the lobby changed, tenser now. A man in a wrinkled suit, likely fresh from work, waited 2 spots behind. He had been greeted politely. Across the room, an older woman in a floral dress laughed with another teller. No delays, no suspicion. Danielle looked back to her counter, her jaw tight. Nearly 5 minutes had passed. No explanation, no justification, just silence. She knew this wasn't about procedure. If it had been, there would have been some explanation, a courtesy. Instead, she got nothing. Then the door opened. The teller returned with company. A middle-aged man, sturdy build, bald, rimless glasses. His name tag, Todd Larson. His expression, polite but guarded. He didn't walk up casually. He assessed her. Danielle recognized the look. She had seen it before, but never directed at her. Todd approached with a forced smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to withdraw some funds." Danielle nodded. "Yes, $5,000. From my account. Using my ID." Todd glanced at the teller, then at her. "Would you mind if I take another look at your ID?" Danielle breathed slowly, steadying her tone. "I already handed it to her." He ignored the remark, lifted the ID, and held it to the light. "Then, Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking here?" Her stomach turned. The question was gentle, but loaded. It wasn't curiosity. It was a challenge. Her voice sharpened. I banked here since this location opened. Todd nodded slowly as if trying to absorb that. And you're requesting a $5,000 withdrawal? Her patience was wearing thin. That's exactly what I wrote. The room grew quieter. A few customers glanced toward her. Todd flipped the ID, avoiding eye contact. And what is it that you do for a living, Miss Grayson? Danielle laughed, not out of amusement but disbelief. There it was. The moment when their professionalism cracked and the truth finally showed. She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing as she evaluated him. I work in finance, she said cautiously. Todd's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Oh, what area of finance? Danielle let the silence linger before answering. Banking. That response made him falter just briefly, but instead of retreating, he pressed forward. I see. And this is a personal account, not a business one. Danielle crossed her arms. That's what it says on the form. Another slow nod from Todd. Another uncertain glance at the teller. Then, as though he'd reached a silent conclusion, he placed the ID back on the counter. I'm afraid we won't be able to fulfill this withdrawal at this time. Danielle blinked, trying to process his words. What? She stood up straighter. Excuse me? Todd maintained a calm, deliberate tone. We're unable to verify the transaction. Her heartbeat quickened. What do you mean? You've got my ID. You have my account info. What exactly needs verifying? Todd rested his hands together. It's just a routine precaution. We take customer security very seriously. There it was, that familiar term. Security. A word used to mask deeper assumptions. Danielle's hands curled into fists at her sides. This wasn't about protecting her account. This wasn't about fraud or policy. It was about something else entirely, and she wasn't about to walk away without an explanation. But Todd wasn't finished, and what he said next made it painfully clear. Things were about to spiral. She repeated the words to herself. We're unable to verify the transaction. Danielle's eyes moved from Todd to the teller and back, silently willing them to realize their mistake, to process the request and let her go quietly. But neither budged. She exhaled slowly and leaned on the counter. Todd, she said calmly, her tone firm. What exactly needs to be verified? Todd's voice stayed even. Too even. Well, Miss Grayson, larger withdrawals trigger extra security steps. We just need to verify a few details. Danielle raised an eyebrow. Such as? He paused, just a moment before replying. Just some standard account info. Can you tell me the amount of your last deposit? She stared at him. That wasn't standard at all. Security questions? Sure. But asking for the last deposit on a withdrawal with valid ID? That wasn't normal protocol. Her grip tightened on the edge of the counter. I don't have that number memorized, she said evenly. But if you pull up my account like you would for anyone else, you'll see every deposit I've made. Todd gave her a thin, polite smile. Of course. But for safety reasons, we prefer if the customer can confirm certain account details. Danielle's jaw set. I just handed you my ID. Todd didn't flinch. I understand, but you'd be surprised how often we see forged identification. Her breath caught. I'm not trying to take out $1 million. It's $5,000, a tiny fraction of what's in that account. I followed every step you require. So let me ask you again, what's really going on? Todd kept his voice flat. We're simply following protocol, Miss Grayson. Danielle's patience was unraveling. If I were a man in a tailored suit, would you still be questioning me like this? The question landed. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed his face. A microsecond of truth. Then, just as fast, his professional mask snapped back into place. This has nothing to do with appearances, he said smoothly. It's policy. Danielle let out a short, dry laugh. Is that so? Todd tilted his head slightly, clearly choosing his next words with care. Would you prefer to try another form of verification? Perhaps a utility bill? Or a second ID? Danielle blinked, incredulous. You want me to bring a utility bill to withdraw money from my own account, where you're literally holding my funds? Todd stayed silent. Danielle tapped her nails in the marble. All right, let's make this simple. Pull up my account. He hesitated. You have my name, she continued. You have my ID. If you check my file, you'll see I banked here since day one. I approved this branch. I've likely signed off on some of your training materials. Still, Todd said nothing. Danielle leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but sharpening her words. You may want to check that before you dig this hole any deeper. Todd's lips pressed into a tight line. The teller, who had been quietly observing, shifted uncomfortably. Danielle wondered for just a moment if Todd might back down. Apologize. Fix it. But instead, he sighed softly, like someone reluctantly reaching a decision. I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. Without further verification, we can't process this transaction. A flush of anger surged through her. Not embarrassment, fury. She felt the customers around her stealing glances, sensing the tension but pretending not to see. She heard Todd's, for his politeness, which told her everything. He wasn't worried about identity theft. He'd already decided she didn't belong. But now he had gone too far. If he had just processed the transaction, this would have ended right here. Now, he was going to regret it. Before she could speak again, Todd took a final, irreversible step. His hand slipped under the counter, pressing a hidden button. A silent alarm. A call. Moments later, a security guard emerged. Broad-billed, blank expression, hand resting near his belt. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Danielle's stomach turned. A manager refusing to process a transaction was one thing. Calling security? That was something entirely different. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a power play, and Danielle felt it in her gut. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay composed. Men like Todd were nothing new to her, the kind who didn't expect to be challenged, the kind who saw it as their job to remind certain people of their place. But Danielle had no intention of falling into that trap. She straightened slightly and locked eyes with him. So, you're really going through with this? Todd's expression stayed carefully blank. Our goal is to provide a seamless experience for every customer. A seamless experience as if she were the one causing trouble. The security guard took a step forward, his voice calm. Is there an issue here? Danielle turned toward him, relaxed but firm. That depends, she said coolly. Are you here to assist me with accessing my funds, or just to escort me out? The guard hesitated, glancing at Todd for direction. Todd gave him a short, confirming nod. Danielle gave a quiet, incredulous laugh and shook her head. So this is how you're choosing to handle it. Todd let out a long-suffering sigh, like he was the one being inconvenienced. Miss Grayson, if you return with the necessary documentation, we'll be glad to assist you. But at this time, she cut in sharply. You know what's interesting, Todd? I saw you handle that man's transaction just 10 minutes ago. No extra steps. No second guessing. No security. Todd's expression hardened. Danielle stepped a little closer to the counter, lowering her voice. So I'm just wondering, what's the difference between him and me? The mood in the room shifted. The teller quickly looked away, avoiding her gaze. The guard adjusted his stance slightly, now less rigid. But Todd remained rooted in place. I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Grayson, he said flatly, but we have these procedures for a reason. Danielle stared him down. Then, without breaking eye contact, she calmly reached into her bag. Todd's body tensed. The guard's hand moved instinctively closer to his belt. Danielle didn't even blink. She pulled out her phone and tapped to begin recording. A few customers nearby turned their heads slightly, sensing that something was happening. Todd shifted uncomfortably. Miss Grayson, she spoke over him, her voice cool and collected. I just want this documented. You're denying me access to my own funds, even though I presented government-issued ID. Meanwhile, others are receiving service without any additional requirements. Todd clenched his jaw. Danielle angled her phone toward the security guard. And you? You were called over for what exactly? The guard looked at Todd again, silent. Danielle held her position. She didn't flinch, didn't back off. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. And then Todd made his final fatal error. He didn't touch her. Didn't try to stop the recording. Instead, he reached for her ID, snatching it off the counter, as if he still had the authority in the room. That was the moment Danielle smiled, because clearly Todd didn't yet realize who she was. But he was about to. She let the silence hang for a moment, letting him feel the weight of what he'd just done, grabbing her ID like he owned the place. But this bank wasn't his. It was hers. She turned her phone slightly to capture his face. The guard, the tension thick in the air. And then with perfect composure she said, "Todd, let me formally introduce myself." His face twitched, the first crack in his carefully held mask. Danielle calmly took her ID back, lifting it from his grasp with precision. She flipped it over and tapped the name printed on the card. "You see this? This isn't just any ID." She paused, letting the room grow still. "I'm the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." Instant silence. The guard's posture straightened. The teller went pale. Even the customers who had been pretending not to watch froze in place. For the first time since the confrontation began, Todd faltered. He swallowed hard, lips parting slightly as if to speak. But no sound came out. Danielle slowly slid her ID back into her bag. "I built this institution. From the ground up. I personally approved this branch. And I signed off on the hiring budget that landed you this position." Todd's fist clenched. His entire demeanor crumbled. Gone was the smooth, condescending manager. What remained was panic. Danielle gave him a tight smile. "Today, I came in like any regular client, just to see what would happen." She tilted her head. "You know what happened, Todd?" He stayed silent. "I was denied service, lied to, dismissed, and treated like I didn't belong." Todd opened his mouth. "Miss Grayson," she raised a hand. "No, you had your chance. Now it's my turn." She turned slightly so her voice carried across the room. "If I were wearing a tailored suit, if I were a man, or if I looked like what you think a CEO should look like, this wouldn't have happened." Todd looked at the security guard, desperate for support. The guard said nothing. The teller stared down, practically wishing she could vanish. Danielle calmly lifted her phone again. "So, Todd," she said coolly, "should I send this recording to corporate, or would you prefer I handle this right here and now?" Todd went pale. His mouth opened and closed. And again, "Miss Grayson, I truly apologize. This was just a misunderstanding." Danielle raised a brow. "A misunderstanding?" He nodded quickly, stumbling over his words. "Yes, absolutely. I can complete your transaction right now." She let the silence linger a second longer, then gave a soft, cold laugh. "Oh, Todd," she said, shaking her head. "We both know it's a little late for that." And the truth hit him like a freight train, because now everything that happened next was entirely up to her. The confident manager from earlier had vanished. Todd now stood stiff, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing holding him together. The guard shifted again, uncertain of his role now. His eyes moved from Danielle to Todd, silently wondering, am I still supposed to intervene? Danielle slowly tapped her nails against the countertop. "I just want to be clear on something, Todd," she said, her voice measured and sharp. Just minutes earlier, her ID hadn't been enough. Her name hadn't been enough. Her transaction history hadn't been enough. They wanted more proof, more confirmation. But now that they knew who she was, suddenly none of it mattered. Danielle let the pause stretch, watching Todd squirm under the weight of the moment. Todd swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Miss Grayson, I deeply regret how this unfolded. Please believe me, none of this was intentional." Danielle gave a cold, dry laugh. "Not intentional?" she repeated. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Todd's eyes flicked wide for a second, but he said nothing. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she continued, her voice low but sharp. "You looked at me and made a decision that I didn't belong here, and you put every obstacle in my path to make sure I felt that. Todd shook his head quickly. That's not true, I swear. Danielle raised her hand. Stop. I'm not interested in another scripted apology. Let's be clear, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. His jaw clenched. By now, the entire lobby had stopped pretending. Customers stared. Employees stayed frozen. The tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Danielle turned to the security guard. You were called over to remove me, right? The guard hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Yes, ma'am. That was my understanding. She nodded once. And now that you know who I am, do you still think that was necessary? The guard glanced toward Todd, then back at her. His stance shifted. No, ma'am. I was following instructions. Danielle studied him for a beat. She knew how this would go. Todd would try to push blame elsewhere, minimize the situation, bury it. But this time, it wasn't going to be buried. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with corporate. And you're going to explain exactly what happened here today, in full detail. Todd's hands trembled as he picked up the card. Yes, Miss Grayson. Absolutely. Danielle turned back to the guard. I appreciate you responding when called, but I suggest that in the future you take more care in assessing what really warrants your presence. If a customer isn't being disruptive, intimidation shouldn't be the first step. He nodded, eyes steady. Understood, ma'am. Then Danielle faced the teller. You, she said firmly. The young woman flinched, still glued to the register. Danielle leaned slightly over the counter. You saw my ID. You had my account number. And you still chose not to listen. The teller finally looked up, eyes wide. I was just following policy, ma'am. Danielle's tone stayed cool. Then maybe ask yourself why that policy always seemed to apply to people like me. The teller looked away, swallowing hard. Danielle scanned the room. Every customer was watching. Every staff member had heard. This had become about more than a withdrawal. It had become about principle. She straightened her shoulders. The lesson had been delivered. But she wasn't finished. She was going to make sure nothing like this happened again. Her heels clicked against the polished tile as she walked toward the exit. The silence in the bank was absolute. Todd stood motionless, still clutching her business card. The teller looked like she wanted to disappear. The guard now stood awkwardly, unsure of his role. Danielle reached the door, then paused. She turned back around. There was one final thing she needed to say, because she wasn't the type to let something like this go. She had poured years into building this institution. It was supposed to be a place where customers felt respected, secure, and seen. But today proved that written policies meant nothing if the people enforcing them didn't believe in them. She took a breath and looked around the room. Then, in a voice clear, steady, and impossible to ignore, she said, "This will be the last time something like this happens in my bank." The weight of her words was undeniable. Todd flinched. The teller shifted nervously. The security guard looked at the floor. Danielle continued, "I will not tolerate customers being treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or ignorance." Her tone remained level. She didn't need to raise her voice. Every single person in that room was listening. There will be changes, because if this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to people who don't have the power to push back. Still, no one spoke. Todd swallowed again, struggling to recover. "Miss Grayson, I assure you, don't assure me," she cut in coolly. "Prove it." He closed his mouth. Danielle glanced down at her phone. The recording was still rolling. She stopped it and tucked it back into her bag. "Corporate will be in touch," he said. "And Todd?" He straightened like he'd been shocked. "You might want to start updating your resume." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked out the door. The consequences were swift. By morning, Danielle had called an emergency meeting with corporate leadership. Every branch manager across the network was summoned. Every policy related to customer service and discrimination was reevaluated. And Todd? He was gone. But Danielle didn't stop there. She implemented mandatory bias training across all locations. created an internal accountability system, and launched a direct line for customers to report mistreatment, no matter how subtle. Within weeks, the impact was visible. Employees became more conscious. Customers, especially those who had felt ignored before, noticed the change. And Danielle? She never forgot that afternoon. It was proof of something she had always believed. Real change doesn't come from written statements. It happens when someone refuses to accept things as they are. And that day, that someone was her. Closing call to action paraphrased: if you or someone you know has experienced something like this, don't stay silent. Speak up. Expose it. Demand better. Because change only happens when we stop accepting anything less.